for the people who want to sharpen their skills in the arena, as it were, what is your approach to debating? How do you prepare exactly?
So fundamentally, you just shouldn't get into debates if you are unable, or if you can't really like put yourself in the same mind space as the person you're debating. Which, I mean, sometimes that can be quite difficult. There are a lot of like really odd people out there, and this is actually one reason why sometimes when I get into debates with really crazy people who make absurd claims, I just don't do it. I just leave it. I'm like, no, because I can't even put myself into that headspace, right? Like, I can put myself into the head of a communist and be like, okay, I heard some things about the Soviet Union was super good and blah 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 blah, and I went down a rabbit hole. There you go. There's some people. I'm just like, yeah. I can't even start there, so I'm not going to debate them, right? So I think that's the most important thing. Be somebody who can actually understand your opponent and understand where they're coming from, even though you acknowledge they're wrong. Of course, also understand logical fallacies. That's incredibly important. Take things slowly. Don't allow people to just get in little zingers in there and then just abandon that. If they want to make a claim and then move on really quickly, be like, no, let's go back to that claim you made. You prove that. Can you back that up? Or I have some arguments against that. You have to keep things slow, make sure you maintain the proper pace, and also don't let people who are supposed to be on the defensive go on the offensive. They try to do that all the time. People hate debating on the defensive. It's the worst, and I understand it's the worst thing ever, debating on the defensive. It's much harder to do than debating on the offensive, because people could just use the Socratic method. They could just pester you until you forget the definition of a word or can't quite ground this one thing. It's like it's super easy to be on the offensive if you know what you're doing. So right. If you're like going after what somebody's saying, like the socialists really especially hate being on the offensive or the defensive. They want to attack capitalism. I made a video on TikTok a couple months ago where I was like, hey, can you socialists convince me to be a socialist? Like, why should I be a socialist? Like, you guys keep criticizing me. You're like, oh, you should be a capitalist. Well, like, tell me why. And I'm like, but I have a few rules, all right? You can't do it by just saying capitalism is bad, pointing out that homelessness exists, pointing out that the world isn't perfect. That's not an argument for socialism, right? You have to make an argument for socialism, not an argument that capitalism isn't perfect. Because I'm not a utopian, so I acknowledge that you can have a capitalist society where all the problems in the world aren't solved. And that's fine. That's how reality is going to be. So just you pointing out that a problem exists doesn't prove I should be a socialist. It doesn't prove socialism is better. You have to make an argument for socialism in the defense of socialism, and they never want to do that. A lot of people were criticizing me for that. I'm like, you guys just like not grasp this? It's a very basic concept. I saw a meme on TikTok where they're like, oh, capitalism isn't the problem, and it goes, well, the flowers are blooming in Antarctica, which is a whole climate change thing. Like, oh, capitalism's causing climate change. But it's like, and then I see the person's a socialist. It's like, what? So if capitalism is the problem, that means we should be socialists. But like socialist countries were much worse for the environment. You're not making an argument for socialism. You're just trying to criticize capitalism, just going on the offensive. So yeah, never let people flip that around on you. If they try to do that, call them out and get things back on track. Don't let people like drag you all over the place. You should be the one dragging. Don't let them drag you.
For me personally, I'm definitely nowhere near as skilled of a debater as you are. My technique has always been, the world is a big place. There's a lot of information out there, and you should absolutely, gather as much as you possibly can prior to it. In any case, both supporting you and what your opponent may very well try to cite in advance. But like I said, that's, still, that's pretty simplistic. Like I said, I'm definitely not on your level as far as debating.
Oh, yeah, I mean, that's a very important thing as well. I entirely agree with that. If you, that's kind of related to the first point I made. If you truly want to understand your opponent, sometimes you have to go out and do the research. You have to know what they're going to bring up, what arguments they're going to bring up, and if it requires sources, articles, papers, books, then you should have some familiarity with that. If you can't debate a Marxist if you have no familiarity with Marxism, and if you're going to debate somebody who's going to argue that the Soviet Union is good, you should be familiar with the arguments that they're going to make. So, that's an argument I'm very familiar with. So they bring up these sources. I'm like, yeah, I already knew that you were going to bring this up because all of you do it, and I'm familiar with it. And let me explain to you why it's wrong. Let me explain to you how I know you didn't even read it, and so on. So yeah, I mean, if you know your stuff, then people are just going to constantly embarrass themselves against you.
Yes. I mean, it is certainly, like I was saying, it is certainly one thing to make a strong case for your side, but I would argue that that's, like I was saying, that's only half the battle. I mean, we do have to be able to respond to opponents as well, and this is what I would say. Yeah, that's really what I would say separates the men from the boys on the debate stage. If one were to debate a socialist, for example, they would have to respond to potential arguments a socialist might issue in advance. And in other words, as I see it, a debater would have to know the issue inside and out from virtually every angle and perspective. But like you're getting into, as somebody who has debated so many socialists on these matters over the years, just one final question I'd like to ask is, what are the common flaws that you see in your opponent's arguments? What are the most common flaws? What are the roads that they often go down? And the ones that are so easy for you to, call them out on at this point, since you've seen it on so many occasions?
Well, I mean, the big one is the one I just mentioned, that they want to just attack capitalism and not defend socialism, make actual arguments in favor of socialism. That's the absolutely number one, top of the list, because that's what every single one of them are going to do. In terms of other flaws, it's going to vary by the type of socialist you are talking to. It's I guess if I were to give a second one, it might be that they never really seek out to understand the data they're citing. So they'll cite paycheck to paycheck, that they love that one, or the wage productivity gap and stuff like that. And they'll send headlines and stuff like that, but they don't really take the time to understand all of these things. And that's a huge advantage, something you can take advantage of, because you can go out and read the common citations that they have and find the flaws in them, or find that how they misrepresent them. And when you're talking to somebody, you can bring all this up. Well, actually, I guess another really big one is the assumption of evil or malicious intent. That's a issue that a lot of people have, though. But it's definitely very prevalent amongst the socialists. So, the first point I made on debating is to be able to understand where they're coming from. They don't understand where they think we genuinely want a feudalist society, and we think we're going to be kings in it, and we want to slaughter the workers and whip them and stuff. They're kind of delusional in that way. So that is a big problem you run across. Then it was like, oh, you must be getting paid to be against socialism or communism. You're getting paid off. There's a lot of different accusations that come from that basic assumption of it's bad faith is what it is fundamentally. It's bad faith, and they're assuming that you're always in bad faith. So that I would probably put that as number two, actually. So number one is they only like to be on the offensive, and number two is that they can't put themselves in your shoes.